Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Joanna Mang. Joanna, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I am a past and future guest of the show. Sometimes I write stuff, but not that often.
Thank you so much for coming back on the show. So, our topic today is the HBO limited series, The Rehearsal, which had a 6 episode run and finished about 3 weeks ago when we're taping this. But I've had continued to think about it since then, and there was a lot of people writing reactions to it, and it seemed like most people really liked it, but were also like, this is insane. How did this end up on TV? I can't believe this exists. So we're going to be talking about it in a couple different ways, but I guess I'll
I have a
just,
question to start off. Do
yes.
you relate to Nathan Fielder's character on that show?
Well, I mean, in some ways I do, but in other ways, the character is so purposely alienating and, is sort of like, I don't know, he's acting as though he is a robot or, has no understanding of human emotion. And
Right.
so there's that. But so let's just back up. So Nathan Fielder is a comedian. He's Canadian. He's most well known for the show Nathan for You that was on Comedy Central that I think ran for 3 seasons and wrapped up
No, longer than 3. They were
4.
really short seasons, but
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. There's 50 or so episodes
yeah.
and it wrapped up a couple years ago. And that show was a kind of comedic reality show that had some parts that were sort of like Borat and some parts that were sort of like Bar Rescue or another show where someone is coming in to like fix a small business, but it was sort of a parody of a reality show. And the conceit was that Nathan Fielder, playing a version of himself, was a business expert and he would go to small businesses in the greater Los Angeles area. They're having some problem and he would offer a solution that was totally insane. And then they would do it and comedy would usually ensue. And so the solutions, so in the first episode, there's a pizza place that has if the pizza's not delivered in 30 minutes, you get a second free one. And he says his solution, for these people to increase their business is offer it, say, if we don't get it to you in 8 minutes, you'll get a second pizza. And the proprietor says that's insane. It's impossible to deliver a pizza in 8 minutes. And Nathan's solution is, well, the second pizza, the free one, will be miniature. So it's about the size of like an Oreo cookie. And it comes in a tiny little box. And people will be so delighted by this that they'll want to like order pizza more often. So they actually do it and they make these realistic, actual edible tiny little pizzas, like smaller than a pizza bagel. And then they show them delivering it to people. It's takes more than 8 minutes. And the people says, where's my free pizza? And they're shown this tiny little pizza. And of course, they're all mad. And some of them threaten the delivery person with violence. So his ridiculous schemes basically always fail, but they go off in all sorts of strange directions.
Well, and
And then,
that's his bit is that his character believes that people will love this, and then is always surprised by the way things turn out. Like the gas rebate one where you have to climb to the top of a mountain to file the rebate. And he's like, I was so surprised that there were people that wanted to do this. And then I was so surprised that there were people that wanted to stick around because they wanted, to save $12 on gas, right? Like, of course, going into it, Nathan Fielder himself, the director, would have known that people would do it. Of course, they're banking on being able to fill a van full of people who want to do that. But his character has to maintain this constant surprise. And I was listening to an old interview with him on the Chris Hardwick podcast where he was talking about Nathan for You, and he was saying that his main goal with the show is for every episode to be surprising. He doesn't want it ever to feel redundant, like it's a formula where, okay, he goes into the business and then he offers a solution and then this happens and then you laugh. Like he always wants it to feel fresh and like something is happening that you didn't expect. He seems terrified of boring his audience.
hmm,
And he seems really transparent about that. Unless on that podcast, he was doing a character who is describing his show. Because, of course, with him, you never know which layer of reality you're residing in, right?
yes, yes. And there's an Andy Kaufman esque aspect to his persona where he's he plays himself in Nathan For You and in this new show.
It's Andy Kaufman meets Charlie Kaufman, right? It's like,
There's a lot of Charlie Kaufman, especially in
I
this new
don't
one.
know if he's kidding or not, and I don't know what level of reality I'm on, and if any of this is serious right now. But as the audience, you are required to take it seriously. Okay, have you seen Mulholland Drive?
Yes, but years ago.
Okay, you know where the part where they're in the theater and the band leader, the guy is like, "No, I bandai. Like, there's no band here. It's all fake." And
Mhm.
they're like, okay. And then the woman gets up and she starts singing "Crying" by Roy Orbison, and it sounds so real. And then like she like drops dead, and the singing keeps going. It's every time you watch it, it's surprising because you're like, even though he told us that wasn't her singing, it looks so realistic. And that's what movies and TV are like, right? Like even if they tell you this isn't real, you still you still get into it so quickly, and then they can pull the rug on out underneath from you even when they tell you, like David Lynch did, "I'm doing this to you, look at me, I'm about to pull the rug."
Mhm.
That's what Nathan Fielder is so good at. Even when you know that it's not real, it takes just a few seconds for you to get um invested, and to not be able to figure out what's real and what isn't. Like
Yeah.
whether Angela in the rehearsal is actually an actress. Like I don't think that she is. There's all this debating. I think that's kind of, it's not the point anyway, but I don't think that she is. But when you're watching it, the effect is really the same whether she's an actress or she isn't. Because
Okay.
the point of her is how Nathan plays off of her. Sorry, I'm going like 5 different directions.
Okay, but just to back up okay, so for people, that's the background. Nathan Fielder. The show was a cult hit and has gained admirers. I think I almost entirely watched it after it had gone off the air. Just watching reruns, and so more and more people were like, "Oh, this guy is sort of a deranged genius. Like this stuff he's doing is really off the wall." But in on Nathan For You, it seemed like most of the things that were happening were real in the sense that reality television is real. The people all knew they were on a TV show and they willingly signed up to be on a TV show. They were sort of led to believe that it would be a standard reality TV show where they would get like a business expert to come in and end up being this wacky guy. So there's a Borat like aspect to it. Less cruelty, I think. But sometimes there was some cruelty in the
And
original
then
show.
he would bring in actors like in the smoking one, the smokers allowed bar, like he goes and he hires actors to
Yes.
play, which is really like him warming up for the rehearsal, right? It's basically the same, a very similar situation.
Right.
But
And he's also Nathan Fielder, the real life human, is also doesn't give a lot of interviews and is very doesn't say a lot. Or maybe he's become more like media shy as his popularity has grown and he doesn't like need to promote himself as much. But
no, he doesn't
the
say a lot in his interviews. I've listened to a couple of them, and it's
okay, the
like,
line between him doing a bit and him being a real person is somewhat ambiguous. And yeah,
because he
okay.
doesn't
So
say a lot.
and his persona is very sort of like unemotional,
And
like so,
everything he says sounds like a joke, and it's funny. It's just funny because he's so deadpan.
yeah, it's
So
extremely deadpan, and in the show, in the original Nathan For You, he's doing these absurd things and he never breaks. There's like one or two moments where something so crazy happens, you see him start to laugh, but like he seemingly throws himself into these crazy real life situations, most of which he creates himself, and other people are like, they don't understand what is happening, and he's just committing to this bit very strongly. Okay, so then this new show that just aired on HBO. This is really the first thing he's done since Nathan For You ended, and it's called The Rehearsal. And the initial setup is that Nathan Fielder on his original show, he wanted to anticipate every possible thing that could happen when he was interacting with real people, not actors. And so he would like came up with like the Fielder method of rehearsing beforehand and hiring an actor to play a real person and going through all the possible scenarios of how people would react so he could anticipate every possible every possible eventuality and plan for it, and so he would know what to do and know what lines to say when he's interacting with a real human. Did you have a sense that okay, what was your sense of like the reality of this, sort of in the beginning? Like, do you think there is a Fielder method at all, or what do you think?
like that he himself is doing that.
Yeah, I mean, do you think he really was ever? And so he comes in as like the expert in this idea of simulating a scenario so that you'll be prepared when it happens. And it's very elaborate, and he has this like software that's like a decision tree sort of thing that you can go along. And if someone says this, you follow this path sort of thing. And he's wearing a laptop on a harness. It's very silly looking, but
Well,
I don't know.
his character is in this show is someone who thinks there's a correct way of doing things. And then if you can kind of hack the correct way of doing things, then you can have a life that has meaning and that you can have real relationships with somebody, with other people. And that this will be like it's like he envies people. He says in one part, like, I envy people their ability to just believe. And he envies people their ability to have connections with other people or to just have certainty about like, should I have kids? Should I, like be or how should I be around other people? Some people just know. And that's real, right? Like there are people who really feel that way. There are people who it comes easier to and people who it's harder for.
Yeah.
And then he's just taking it to an extreme where he's a person who has somehow found enough power to engineer situations where he can control.
Hmm.
And then but then to make it, like I said, surprising and not boring, because it would be boring to just watch someone be like a puppet master or a Willy Wonka, like Core in the show calls him.
Hmm.
Like he's not Willy Wonka because his character then has to become the victim of his own machine and constantly be questioning himself, which is what makes the show interesting and fun to watch, right? It's why you keep watching it, because you're watching him try to figure out how to run this device that he's become stuck in.
Okay. Yes. Crazy contraption that he's engineered almost entirely himself with this. He's assembled this crazy team. Okay, so that's the premise. And then in the first episode they find this guy who is embarrassed because he's crazy about bar trivia. And this guy, his bar trivia team, everyone else in the team had a master's degree and he did not, and for some reason he decided to lie saying he did have a master's degree, and kept this lie for a decade, and now he's ready to confess. And so the way to do this is to create an exact replica of the actual bar where this confession is going to take place, and practice it multiple times with actors portraying both the person who is confessing to and like the bartender, the other patron and stuff. And that's the initial premise, and it's totally absurd. And you're like, they recreated this actual bar in a warehouse, and you're sort of just like struck by, wow, this is such an insane idea. And HBO really did spend all the money to like recreate this bar.
And he said it that one of the people building it told him that it probably cost more to build the replica bar than it would to build that actual bar. They didn't elaborate on why. I'd be really curious to hear why.
That's
Um,
it. That's interesting. Okay.
and I'm sure
Well, I
there
mean,
were
they had,
technical
when
reasons
they're
for like
building
I'm sure with like plumbing or I don't know, getting it to that space, whereas having it already set up. Yeah.
yeah, and the fake bar, and then okay. So at this point, if you haven't seen the show and you're interested in it, I would say just go check it out. Watch the first episode, and then see if you're into it, and then keep going, because really it's sort of, in some way, like the show is full of crazy spoilers and crazy twists in almost every episode. The premise is changed or inverted in some strange way. But it seemed like after watching this first episode, I was like, wow, this is insane. It's sort of like Synecdoche, New York, the Charlie Kaufman movie, or The Remainder, which is this weird novel by Tom someone that came out like 10 or 15 years ago about a guy who gets a lot of money because something that fell from an airplane hits him in the head, and then he wants to like recreate this exact scene that he envisions and live it over and over and over again. So it's a little bit like that. It's very weird postmodern. And then you think, okay, this is gonna be like Nathan For You, where he's finding a different person each episode and spending all this money to create a ridiculous scenario, and it's very silly and weird things are gonna happen. But that's not quite what happens. It takes various weird turns. So I was, at the end of each episode, you're like, this is insane. Like it's seemingly it's like a different show now, because he ends up, he ends up moving in with this woman who is like sort of set up as the next person, and her dilemma is not this seemingly extremely trivial thing about lying to lying to the quiz teammates, but it's that she's isn't sure whether she wants to adopt a child. And so she's going to play out what it would be like to raise a child from age 0 to 18 with different child actors coming in every, like, both like every 4 hours, because you can't have like really small children as actors for labor law, but also the child would be aging up every week or so, and so there would be like 6 versions anyway, and so that this is seems like suddenly the stakes from being like the most minor thing possible are suddenly like, a very important decision in someone's life whether or not to have kids. So then it seems like, okay, this is changing entirely, and then it ends up that he moves in and with the woman and is now like a much more central participant and is no longer just the puppet master figure.
But
He's now
what I
he's
thought
now
was
the
so
main
good about
character.
it what I thought was so good about it, what part of what made it so funny was like in the first episode with the bar trivia guy, he treated that very seriously. Like like, okay, I'm a bar trivia person.
Yes,
And
I'm just putting together now that you yourself are a trivia master.
when he when he's asking him about like about bar trivia, and when he like suggests like the idea of cheating, and that the guy's like, oh, absolutely not, that doesn't have, it's, he says it's sacrosanct, which is of course totally accurate. Nobody would, if you don't cheat, that's not a thing. And like then like the guilt that he feels, or that his character allegedly feels at covertly feeding Core the trivia answers, um and how seriously his character takes that as like that would be a betrayal. I mean, he's taking that dumb little situation as seriously as he does like the raising the child with his Jewish faith situation. It's like
Yes.
every social situation is an unknown and a puzzle and utterly terrifying no matter what it is. And so we're just following him along on these different, like we're watching him go to this, from the stupid thing to the really serious thing, and we're like, oh, how will he act? Oh, the same. And it's funny every time watching him be that serious about things that are all of different levels of seriousness, which a normal person would be able to navigate. But the conceit of the show is that Nathan doesn't know that. Like, we're watching the show, the audience knows that there's no one mistake you made in a conversation that derailed it and ruined your relationship with someone, or ruined it. That's not how life works. There's not like one thing you could have said differently. The conceit of the show is that Nathan, the character, doesn't know that. And so we have to watch him try to endlessly recreate situations, knowing that there's nothing that he can do to control something as uncontrollable as the way two people interact with each other.
Hmm.
And you watch him just never learn that lesson, which is funny. And it's why it's cringe, and it's why it's frustrating and everything. And there are other things about the show that are like deeply uncomfortable and get into like an ethical thing, which I guess we could talk about, like the
Yeah.
child actor thing, the ethics of using child actors.
Yeah, so okay, so I just did a binge rewatch of the whole series, and I mean, it's interesting to watch the second time because a lot of it is these twists that come out of nowhere. Like him moving in with the woman, was like that's a crazy twist. I did not see that coming at all. And so when I know everything that's coming, there's less of a shock value. I'm more like looking at the strange details and just the oddness of it. So it was definitely less funny the second time, but there was some stuff I did pick up on. But it was like, what is this? What is this thing about? And there's like a dozen or more things you could say it's about. So it's about reality TV. It's about acting in Hollywood. It's about solipsism and whether you can know another person. It's about anti-Semitism. It's about parenting and raising a child. It's yeah, the ethics of child actors, and the ethics of sort of like acting in general, and an actor feeling like emotions versus a real person feeling emotions. And
Also about the ethics of viewing. Like, he loves the idea of people who are watching and being watched. And he loves to create situations where people are audiences and the observed. And I think when people talk about like his show, like about Nathan For You being exploitative, and of like it's specifically like exploiting immigrants, like the maid service episode,
yeah, so
or
a lot.
even,
So I mean, it's one of the interesting things about the show is you see how many like first generation immigrants run small businesses in
right.
the greater Los
And
Angeles
that's just a
area.
function of you're going into small businesses in Greater Los Angeles,
Yeah,
which
so you
is
see it
which is a very diverse
a lot of
area.
people who you don't usually see on TV or reality TV.
Yeah, even like the gas station owner guy. I don't know what country he's from. He seems Middle Eastern. And he's first generation. So like, I don't think that he's seeking out first generation immigrants specifically to make fun of him. I think it was more a function of, you're talking about small businesses in LA.
Right.
But the idea that he's exploiting them or that he's exploiting the child actors.
Yeah, I mean, in the initial run, it was like that these people are not in on the joke, and they're the butt of the joke, and yeah, there was
Or
this.
like in the rehearsal where the child actor, like it seems like the child actor bonded to him, and then he doesn't have a dad, and so you're seeing him cry and have a hard time separate truth from reality. I mean, here's the thing, like obviously watching that, and I, having little kids, I'm like, I'm very uncomfortable. I'm like, I don't like that this mom put her kid in that situation. At the same time, I empathize with the fact that she's a single mom and this is a way to make money that would be hard to turn down. I've never been in her situation, so it's easy for me to be like, just don't do it. Um,
Mhm.
but but I also watching it, I'm thinking about, well, I watch tons of shows with child actors in them, and I rarely think about the work conditions. Whereas this show is talking about the legal hours they're allowed to work. It's showing you the parents behind the scene. It's showing you the intake process. It's forcing you to think about child employment in the TV industry in a way that no other show does. And
Yeah.
so to pick on this show as being exploitative is really just me trying to make myself feel better for watching any show with child actors in it. Like you can say in the abstract, oh, child acting and getting your kids into acting, like that's creepy. Why would I want to be a stage parent? But like, obviously, we need them to make TV look realistic.
Yes,
Because
and
shows like trying to dress up the teenager like a 6-year-old is it takes you out of the moment, you know.
right, and, at least me, the first time, so he's most of the action unfolds in rural Oregon, and, at least in the initial time I was watching it, I was thinking like, "Okay, all these child actors, they like, they brought 'em from Hollywood or something," and so sort of like the parents know that, like, know what's happening, but then there's this turn in the final episode where you see that there's, you go behind the scenes or something with one child actor and the mother, and who's the child is 6 years old, named Remy, and he seemingly is bonded with Nathan, is maybe somewhat confused about the difference between fake and real, which is something the entire show is playing with. And yeah, it becomes an indictment of the entire thing. But there's all these layers to it. So one thing is they didn't have to include this at all. They could have cut the Remy stuff entirely if they felt bad about it or felt that it would, show Nathan or HBO in a negative light. They just could not included that whatsoever. So they included it on purpose. And so it's a self-indictment in some ways, but then it's also like Nathan, the fact that they're showing their dirty laundry is like, oh, like, yeah, Nathan's better than the standard like child actor sort of thing on Disney Channel, so it's like they're having their cake and eating it too or
I mean,
something.
maybe I don't know. That all depends on how the audience receives it. Because yeah, he goes to Remy's house and they live in this um, little like
Like a tract house.
not even like a tract house. I mean, it looked like a cross between a bungalow and a trailer, and very very simple and basic. And his mom is not some like stay at home leisure stage mom who's just sort of carting him off to like auditions for fun. It's like she seems like she needs the money.
It's
um
it's sort of unclear, they don't tell us why, was this his first acting gig or why she wanted to do this sort of thing to begin with.
to me it just seemed like she needed the money. That was just the sense that
Mhm.
I got, and not that she was like putting him to work to make money for her, but kind of like, well, here's an opportunity that we got, and I think he would be good at it, and he seems like he would have fun, and he did have fun, so I'm just trying here. Like, um, it it
Yeah,
just
the
seems
mom
like
is a very sympathetic figure, and
she
and
is. I mean, you can tell sometimes she comes off a little phony. Also, I couldn't tell if maybe it was because she was nervous and she felt guilty about how her son was acting. Sometimes when your kid is acting in a way that doesn't reflect well on you, you kind of like tense up and
uh-huh.
it's not like it's like you don't want to be like oh, my kid's behavior was a reflection of me, but it still feels that way, and you feel like people are judging you, and then you kind of like you get tense and everything. I got that vibe from her. That
Okay.
was why she was coming off as kind of phony.
Okay, well, she's
Uh,
not. She doesn't come across as a standard stage mom, and yeah, and
No, and so that whole thing, like going to their house, and I know like in the Nathan's shows, like they shoot so much footage, they shoot tons of footage, and they have to decide then later what story they're going to tell, right? They don't know what the narrative is going to be until later in post-production when they're stitching it together. So yeah, they didn't have to show it. And then the fact that they decided to was, they not just to be like, oh, here's the criticism of child labor, which is probably not not the main reason, is because it fit in with the story of Nathan's guilt about Nathan the character, his guilt about doing the show, right? That the whole thing was like, I don't know how to relate to people, and then I try something, and then if they don't end up liking it, then I feel guilty. And he said that about Nathan for you too. He said, like, when people, if I find out that people are uncomfortable, like I feel really bad because my point is for it to be like more fun. And the idea that I would have caused harm is really upsetting to me. And I buy that from him. I don't think that because the only alternative is that he's a sociopath. And I don't think this show would work if you were a sociopath. I think you need a person who really
right.
feels deeply.
Well, okay, so in the first episode with the Willy Wonka thing, Core, the guy in the first episode, the real person, said something like, you're like Willy Wonka, and Nathan is like Willy Wonka. I don't really remember the story, and
Wasn't he the bad guy?
yeah, he's like, was he the bad guy? And then, Court's like, well, it's sort of complicated, but you created a world of pure imagination for me or something. You're making dream worlds come true. And then
Mhm.
at the very end of the episode, this song from Willy Wonka, that is escaping me right now, starts playing, and
The
that
pure
is,
imagination.
yes, pure imagination.
The
But it's sort of it's very like sinister moment of like, oh, and then immediately before that, you had this scene that actually, I read that some people didn't catch it the first time, that they intercut Nathan confessing that he had like helped like plant the answers to trivia contest in Core's subconscious, and then you see that it's actually the actor who was playing Core in the initial like pre-rehearsal, and then it cuts and you see him like freaking out and being like, how do you do this? It's such a betrayal. And then so you see that Nathan does not tell Core that he helped him win.
Yeah, he
And
just tells the actor playing him
yes, and then Core is happy, but then of course the real Core is gonna find out about this eventually because it's
when he
being
watches the show.
filmed for TV. Yeah, so there's all
But
these, yeah, so
that's the
is Nathan like evil, like sort of, an evil mastermind, or
no, no, I think that was the joke, is that he's so cowardly, he couldn't tell the real core. So ran it through with the actor.
yeah, he saw
Then
how
he had
bad
the
it could
actor
go, and so he didn't
has the
say the
actor
truth.
lay into him and be like, "Show me worst case scenario," and then he decides, "Well, I'm not gonna, I can't handle that,
Right.
so we're just not gonna risk it at all," knowing that he's like, Core will watch this alone in his living room, and I won't have to be there for the fallout. Like
Right,
that's
but
the joke, right? That
yeah,
he has
but you
such
but you
a
could say
power.
that Willy Wonka is a sociopath because he, tortures children in his candy factory and also enslaves a race of quasi-human Oompa Loompas.
Sure.
So the fact that that parallel is drawn extremely explicitly in the first episode is like we
And he's
should.
an asshole. Willy Wonka is an asshole. Nathan Fielder is not an asshole. That's not his character is too like dumb for that.
Yeah, too ineffective. I mean, it's weird because he's this behind the scenes mastermind and is ordering like teams of, master like builders and prop people and cameramen to assemble all this stuff and create all these crazy situations. And then when he's on camera, he's like extremely reserved, seemingly like barely moves around, very withdrawn. So that's another another weird contrast that's part of it. Um I mean, yeah, so there's so many weird directions this goes into, and really, this is so the reason I wanted to talk about this is like I've never seen anything or absorbed anything, any like fictional work that's like this before. It has these antecedents like Charlie Kaufman world and stuff, but like I was blown away by this and couldn't believe that it exists.
I was gonna say I've never seen a show that went so deeply into like the practical aspects of making TV. Like when he talks about like having people sign release forms or like showing them the release form, like when he's talking to it's the lawyer. Which episode was it? Where he's in the lawyer's office and he's like, you actually signed this, and he's showing him the
Right.
form. Like he
Right.
like jumps across the desk to try to get it back for the dumb Starbucks episode.
I
He's
guess.
trying to get a lawyer to help him do that. But so he's very upfront, and then he'll talk about like, he shows, and like the person like that shows the lawyer is clearly talking to his producer who's off screen. He's not looking at the correct camera. He doesn't edit that out. um and then talking about like funding and budgets, like with the rehearsal, like, he's telling us like, oh, HBO paid for this, which is funny. That's what the joke, right? Like, I can't believe HBO paid to move my bar across
Yes.
the country, and like, we spent $15,000 building an underground tunnel to the outside, but he's constantly like bringing us like, this is a TV show, you're watching a TV show, it's on HBO, and talking about like the benefits of having like I can never remember how to pronounce this word, the imprimatur of HBO, as
Mhm.
like a draw. Like, we got HBO cameras here, so we know we're going to get people to come to our
Yeah.
acting
Yeah,
workshop.
the
Like,
most absurd one is when he hires the background actors for the child's birthday party, and then he realizes or
you
claims
can't
to
have them, they
realize
can't
that
talk.
if they're speaking on screen, they like get a higher day rate or something. And
Yeah, and then
so
he's like, "This saved us tens of thousands
it
of
says,
dollars." And it
it
was
was kind of
really
weird, but I saved
awkward.
HBO $15,000. And then the narration, I mean, the credits, it's like he's the creator, executive producer, director, but the other people are credited as writers. And so that must involve both the voiceover and sort of like coming up with the concepts or something. And one of them is the sister of the woman who's Kimmy Schmidt, who was on The Office, who's a comedy writer. And so, they brought in some sort of big guns behind us. And so I mean, the whole thing, like, is this real? We at this 20 years into the reality TV era, like we all know reality TV isn't real, but what parts of this are real, and the things that they're saying are fake, maybe they're real, or vice versa. Yeah. So so you brought up Angela, the character who's wondering whether or not to adopt a child. There was some speculation online that maybe she's an actress and she was putting it on. On the second
Mhm.
viewing, both I was sort of more sympathetic to her and thinking, there's no way. Like this is such a strange combination of personalities of this sort of like extremely religious, born again Christian, hippy dippy sort of feely.
So real. I know people like that. Like
It was okay, but it was
the
very
such
particular.
essential oils. Like,
Yeah.
that is very real.
And she seems like, man, but she really is almost always. I mean, she signed up for this. It's a crazy, insane situation, and it's happening during the pandemic. And but she seems, she's presented as a somewhat strange person with unusual beliefs, or at least the kind of things you don't really see. You don't see Christians portrayed in this particular way on TV very often.
Mhm.
Um, but she really basically always like seems to do the right thing more or less. And she says some key lines in the show, which is like, Nathan lies all the time. He's the
Nathan likes to
problem.
manipulate people.
Yes. And of course they left that in. And yeah. So I mean, what did you make of her, or what did you make of the question of like what is real, and or quote unquote real reality TV real, or entirely staged, or
I I bought that she was not an actress. I feel bad for her that not being in that situation. I think she was fine. I think she knew what she was doing and she handled herself. She's an adult. I feel bad for her that that's her personality, that she's so rigid in things, that the reason why she doesn't have what she says she wants, which is like a married life and kids, is because she can't compromise. Like the idea of not letting your another person, like not letting your kid have two faiths that they're raised on, like, and that's just, I don't know. There's
yeah,
no
I
reason
mean,
for that. She's unnecessarily rigid, and then she's kind of acting like, oh, this perfect thing just hasn't happened for me yet. It's like, it's not going to happen if that's how you're acting. You're not the only person in a situation, and then God forbid you have a child and you have to like take them to the doctor or something, and the doctor's like, you know, they need a vaccine or antibiotics, and then or you have to make a compromise with the child's father. It's like, you're screwed, lady.
Right. I mean, on rewatching, so in the second episode, she makes her first appearance, and then they bring in this guy, um, who, you know, is a set up as maybe he will join the show as the father figure, and he seems to be vibing with her on various levels, and he is
Mhm.
also a sort of out there Christian type person, like pot smoking Christian kind of guy. And at first you're like, oh, like maybe this is perfect. They seem like similarly weirdos, but then it's revealed like how much worse he is and how he seems like legit, like really off his rocker and is obsessed with numerology and numbers and
And he has no
signs from the
more.
universe.
He has no morals or sense of responsibility. So that's not
And
going
and
to
he crashed
work.
his car, and, you know, I only realized this on rewatching, so he says this line like 4 times that he crashed his Scion G2 at 100 miles per hour or something. The name of the episode is Scion, and it's also about creating a child, so I
Huh.
thought that was
Oh,
clever, but
you just got that?
I just I just got that this time, but yeah, and so it's like, and he's maybe the if you put Nathan aside, he's sort of the most villainous. Although I don't know, the guy, the anti-Semitic guy who was trying to get his inheritance from his grandfather is also, you know,
You know
not
what I
portrayed in the
loved?
best way.
I loved how like Nathan is showing Nathan going through the situations where he's running into anti-Semitism, like sort of unexpectedly, like you're going around the corner and then all of a sudden, like, like the ghost of Mel Gibson or whatever is the specter of Mel Gibson is
Yeah,
popping up. Okay, that's funny because like that's gonna happen, right? Then he finds the Hebrew tutor, and you're thinking, this woman, like, she's so smart, she's got it together, she's right, she's gonna help him get the courage of his convictions. And then it shows them later having their donuts, and she starts going off on this like Zionist rant, and you're like, oh my god, no, no,
yeah,
back
that
up,
she's
too
yeah, she
far.
seems to be somewhat more grounded in reality. And then there's this part where he's driving up and he says something to her like, "Do you want to sort of rehearse this?" And she says, "No, I like to shoot from the hip." So she's the antithesis of the character Nathan who, you know, plots out every possible thing, and this woman's like, "I'm going to improvise it." You know, it's funny also, like, I assume Nathan Fielder came out of like improv comedy because that's where like all funny people come out of these days. So he must actually be, he's obviously a very good improviser, but like,
I
in,
don't
you know,
know. I know. I mean,
you can't
obviously,
plan out like that sort of thing. Like shooting, it's sort of shooting from the hip, like after you practiced the general skills for a long time. But yeah, and then it turns out that she's like, you know, an ultra Zionist, but, you know, in a way, she's like, sadly, sort of, if you put her on the spectrum compared to some of the other crazy people, like the spectrum of American Zionists, like she is not as crazy as other American Zionists could be, but she
what
seems
was
sort
so
of,
funny was watching him react to that. And then they let the episode end with her just talking over the credits and talking about how, you know, if you have this platform, you need to use it to promote Israel. And he doesn't know what to say. He's, well, I just, like, he can't even say something totally benign like, I have some issues with the way the Israeli government does things. Like, he can't even get that out, let alone what he really thinks, which I'm sure is much more standard leftist, you know, stuff, which is not
I mean, yeah, who
shocking
knows
from a person his
what
age.
his views of politics or Israel are, but
Well,
I mean, they're,
I think it became pretty clear the way he reacted, the way he wanted to end the episode with that being like, isn't this funny? He's gotten himself in this situation. It started with, I love Mel Gibson, and you know, the Jews are going to burn in hell, and then ended with like the Palestinians are basically like getting themselves killed to blame Israel on
yeah,
purpose. And he's like, ah, it's like
yeah.
he can't win. He can't find himself in a social situation that isn't terrifying to him because he keeps being sort of like batted between extremes. And because he doesn't have any convictions that he's willing to live, he's just sort of bouncing between and not knowing where to land, which is what the joke of the show is, right? I love
Yeah.
that. I thought that was so funny. They must have just been crying when that woman started talking, being like, "Oh my god, I'm so glad she said this." Because it's a perfect bookend to the Mel Gibson stuff and to the stage mom who was telling her kid like, he's like, the Jews are gonna burn in hell, and she's
Yeah,
like,
that's so that's in
"Right."
the next episode.
Is that
Yeah,
the
he's
next
like
episode?
debriefing the child who
Yeah.
he had been like secretly, educating in the
Oh my
tenets of
god.
Judaism and stuff. And then he's like, I'm gonna burn in hell. Like that, that's good. You're gonna be in heaven. I'm gonna be in hell. So that is extremely silly. But yeah, I mean, that episode was like much more Jewish content than you see on television almost ever. Um,
Yeah.
and so like you know, I don't know, maybe someone will write like 5 or 10 years from now, like what was really happening behind the scenes, but like, he couldn't have planned from the beginning to bring in this Jewish aspect because like maybe he didn't realize how hyper evangelical Christian the woman involved was. And so like it wouldn't make sense if it was sort of like neutral that he really cared this much. And then I don't know, it's really something. But there was a line that really resonated with me, which was him saying he hadn't been to synagogue services in years because it's so boring.
Because it's
Um
so boring.
yeah, and I was like, "Wow," I felt like finally I feel seen, represented by, my connection to my faith,
And
represented
then
on
when he
screen.
shows it really does look boring. So
No, that's what especially, I mean, the little kid actor who's brought in saying something like, "Do Jews speak English?" And but yeah, it's, a conservative that is what parts of at least the conservative, synagogue service are like. Okay, so, what did you make of the final sequence or the final sort of turn in the final episode where Nathan decides to um, embody Remy's mother? What did you make of that? And because I'm still after a few viewings, I'm not sure what that was supposed to mean, especially the very ending. I'm not sure. What are your thoughts?
well, I mean, it seemed like a just a logical continuation as much as the show can be logical of what he was doing the whole time, right? That he felt guilty. His character feels guilty about how things turned out with Remy, that Remy became attached to him. And then he's wondering, well, the mom seems confident that the kid is going to be okay. How can she know? And the mom's trying to tell him, I just know, you just know when it's your kid. And he's like, I don't know about that. So, in order to understand that, I need to get into that situation where I'm the mom and this kid is the kid. It's like it's the same thing he's been doing the whole time. And then he does that thing where he's like, "I'm your dad." And the kid's like, "No, that's not." The kid tries to like breaks character and tries to
Yeah.
like
So what did you and what? Yeah. So that's the very very end, and
well,
then the
that's
five.
his character like needing like he's like, "I need love and affirmation," right? It's he did that in Nathan for You too with that scene with the actress in the Smokers Aloud scene where he gets her to
Saying
say
"I
"I
love
love
you" over
you"
and over again.
11 times. He's like, "Say it again." And she's like, "I love you." And it gets like more convincing every time. And he,
Right.
he
So
starts crying. And it's the same thing. He's like, I'm gonna use my show. This character is gonna use his show and his power to get people to tell him that he is seen and valid.
did you? How much of Nathan for You did you watch? Because you didn't really watch it before this came out, but you watched some of it after seeing it. So
Yeah.
did you
I
get
just
to
kind of popped
like?
around.
Okay, did you get to the final like crazy like 2 hour finale thing?
I have not done that one
Okay.
yet. I was like, 2 hours? That's a really long time for Nathan for You. So I don't
Yes,
know.
and I mean, seeing that as sort of a bridge between the two shows makes sense. And I'd be interested in what you think about it if you do get to it. But there is an aspect of that, if I'm remembering correctly, like he basically hires a sex worker to come in and like hang out with him. I can't remember why exactly. And then it's very heavily implied that like they actually are sort of falling for each other, but also like that this could be fake because it's television and you want to believe that like people end up together and happy. So that level, yeah, the phoniness aspect of what's happening versus playing with reality is, plays a part of that as well. And there's a running theme in Nathan for You of him being totally inept with women and like, but also extremely horny and like hoping that any situation can somehow result in him getting with a
Well,
woman. And
and being a guy who's such his character is a guy who's such a loser that he has to use his power. The only way he can connect with a woman is by using his power, like in the dumb Starbucks episode where he's like, "Okay, now I need everyone to say who at this place of employment is attracted to each other." So it's like he's like picking on the female employee, and she handles it pretty well because she's kind of like, "This is obviously a joke." But like this is his character is like so pathetic that this is the only shot he has at even having a woman look at him is by putting himself in a position of power over them. But since he's critiquing that and he's making fun of it, he's making it into a joke. it never offends me. It never really bothers me. The only time I was ever uncomfortable watching any of this was that little kid being upset and having it be on TV, because the kid can't consent to that. Like a child cannot consent to that.
Right.
It's one thing to have the only thing that's shown is your acting, because you're acting, but those are his real emotions. Like when people post videos on social media of like their kid being upset, or of them, like, God forbid, like pranking their kid.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, I hate the pictures of kids crying in Santa's lap. Like I hate all of it. I don't think that kids, their emotions are so complicated to them. They're not a joke. And like I don't think he's making a joke out of those kids' emotions, but it just makes me feel so uncomfortable. But other than that, like as far as adults go, I feel like are pretty much fair game. Which is why when they kept every episode that kept having the child actors, I'm like, I really don't want to feel like I don't want to feel like I just want it to be adults he's fucking with, because then it's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. And I guess that's why maybe that is why they made the final episode as it was, to bring that to the fore, that, there were these kids involved who are not old enough to understand really what's happening. There were a couple moments that I thought were fascinating that I just want to mention, maybe, and get your reaction to. One was like, okay, so one was, you know, he goes down to, we did really talked about the Fielder Method actor studio, but he goes to Los Angeles for a couple weeks, comes back, the child is aging 3 years every week, and now the child is a teenager. And he realizes that it would make more sense for the kid to be like surly, that dad has been gone for 9 years, and so he's not going to be happy. And then actually, I mean, another big theme of the show is not just parenting, but like fathers in general and absent fathers, because the woman has an absent father, and she blames her substance abuse issues on that. And
Right.
so anyway, so they play it up that the kid becomes so bad that he has an overdose, and only on second viewing did I catch that you can see that there's apple cider vinegar next to him as he's overdosing, so that, like, it was baking soda and vinegar was like what was coming out of his mouth. And you see a like fully unrolled condom just next to him. So they're just like throwing every possible thing that a kid could do bad. But then he gets loaded into an ambulance. The 15-year-old actor gets loaded into the ambulance. Then he escapes and runs off into the woods. And then they show him at a park with like his other deadbeat friends, and he sees Nathan's there watching. He sees him. He gets into a slide on the playground and emerges as the little boy once again. And that's like a moment of movie magic. And I was sort of like blown away by it. And then they immediately undercut it by showing that the guy is still hanging at the top of the thing and pulls himself out and says, "Did we get it?" at the end. What did you make of that, especially as someone who has young children?
Well, I mean, like he successfully surprised me. If he's terrified of boring his audience and having things feel formulaic, no matter how many times he tricks us, it keeps working. So, I just gotta, I guess, congratulate him on that.
It was like something from a cheesy movie or something, or yeah, it's something, the return to childhood, like the teen has been corrupted and then returning to childhood innocence, and they're showing it in this artful way, and then just immediately showing how fake it is. But the whole thing was fake to begin with, because these are all actors. So that was really something. But then also the turn from rehearsing a possible future to rehearsing the past and trying to figure out where things went wrong, which happens in the final episode or final two episodes. And then the actress who is um playing the woman who I've named just went on my head.
Angela.
The actress who is playing Angela, and they go through over and over again, trying, he's like, where did I go wrong? And that is also like, it's something that every person thinks about is their life. Like, what was not just like the key mistake of my life, but like, how could I have done this differently? And they play it out over and over again, and every time it's the same result. So there's something about like, I don't know, he's saying something about like fate or something. I feel like in that, or, obviously there's a dream of changing your past that could never be realized, but however he tries to play it, even in his crazy simulacrum that he's totally in control of, it's showing that, he would have screwed this up anyway. And so there was something I thought kind of profound about both of these scenes. And then that is undercut because the camera pulls out and you see they're not even in the house, they're on the sound stage, and like the fakeness is shoved back in your face
Every
immediately.
time they pull out and show that they're on the sound stage, it tricks me every time. Or the part with the snow where he's like, winter is very expensive to maintain.
Yes.
Like, what is he talking about? Is he talking about like, because like you have to hire people to come and like scrape the ice off your windshield, but then he pulls back and there it's just fake snow.
Yeah, it's
That
actually
was
quite a
really
beautiful.
funny.
It's like they must have had a drone or something. It's quite a beautiful shot, and you see it's like this perfect circle of the
The
fake
purpose,
snow,
yeah,
but
it was,
actually it's like the fall still in Oregon. It's really,
and
yeah,
it's like that David Lynch scene. It's like that he everything is fake and he's messing with you, and it works every time because he's so good at it.
yeah,
And his editors, and I know he does a lot of the editing too. He like oversees the process or whatever, but like they're really good at that sleight of hand. It's well, he's a magician, right? Like that was his
yes.
first thing
That's
before
part
he
of
did
his
a
origin
comedy.
story, is that he learned to do magic tricks and was like a teenage magician or something. And then there's a
So this is
moment with the teen son where he's like, "Do you want to see a magic trick?" And the son says
yeah.
something like, "I'm not a fucking kid. I don't want to see a magic trick." And that,
So
gets back to like the Willy Wonka, like, creating something, and he's pulling off various illusions throughout this
I
throughout
have
this
to say,
series.
like, I haven't watched a show in a long time where I felt like I was being entertained by a magician. Like sometimes when something's really artfully done, or when you're reading something, or I remember like when I was reading Cloud Atlas, I was like, this guy is a magician. Like,
Uh-huh.
how does he keep doing it? You know, how is he linking these stories together? That's the thought I had watching the rehearsal. Like, well, he's doing little magic tricks at me, and even though I know he's messing with me, I have full buy-in every single time. I'm back for it. I don't want to know how. I don't want to know what's coming. I just want to be surprised, and he pulls it off.
Okay,
So
yeah, that's very well put. And if you're watching a magic trick, that, or you probably know that magic isn't real and that you're being deceived, but you're like, just the brilliance of the deception. You're delighted by how they pull it
and
off, and maybe you want
and
to
that's what
know.
he loves. That's what he
Yeah,
loves about magic, not just doing it, but watching it. Like I heard him talking about how he loves to go to the Magic Castle in LA,
mm,
which is like this cheesy place where you can go and see magic, and sometimes it's not good and sometimes it's really great. You have to like be invited. My
right.
husband's dream is to be invited to go to the Magic Castle by some magician nerd. But you want to be in that suspended disbelief place where you're watching something that you know is fake happen, but for a moment you forget that, and then you get surprised. So
Right,
if
but he's showing, in those scenes that I thought were sort of like, cinematic coups or something. He's immediately showing. It's like he pulled off the trick, and then he immediately shows you that, like, he saws the woman in half, and then 2 seconds later shows you it was two women all along, sort of thing. He's like pulling
and
back
how
to reveal the artifice immediately.
right, and the fact that he turns that, because with his timing and everything, is able to make that funny where you're laughing. Like when he pulled back and showed the fake snow, I burst out laughing. And my son was like, "What are you laughing at?" And then I had to explain, because he was like, "Is that kid's real dad? Why did he call them his fake family?" And so I explained it to him, and he's like, "Why would he do that?" I'm like, "I don't know. I This is not something you could explain to a 9-year-old. Like, we're at the point where we can watch The Simpsons and he gets the jokes. Every once in a while, I have to explain one,
Uh-huh.
but this is
I
why
mean,
we're
we're adults, and we're grappling with what is actually happening on this thing.
yeah, it's definitely post 18 sort of like it is. He's like, I'm like, yes, it is stupid. This is very stupid. Like, I have to agree with you on that.
I mean, part of the brilliance is the commitment to the bit, the commitment to the stupidity, and that they, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to replicate the bar down to the exact thing for this
I love
one
that.
totally insignificant, person's, not
I love
insignificant
that so
dilemma
much.
of
I
this
think
strange person.
because I love bars. I love that he did that, and how he feels so comfortable in the bar. I'm like, that's how I would feel in the bar. Like, that's the dream, man.
Yeah, and then he's the part where he turns into an actual bar, which, I mean, one thing I would like to know eventually about this is like, okay, so the first episode must have been shot before the pandemic, and then there must have been a gap of time when the pandemic happened where they must have scrambled their plans, and maybe that's why they end up mostly spending time at a rural house, and not walking around in the real world, but sort of like, where were the decisions made, and the part where he turns it into an actual bar and has this ridiculous logo of like Nate's Lizard Land or something that must have cost ten thousand
You're like, but I
dollars
made it much better.
to make. But like maybe there was an idea that there'd be like a whole episode of him running the bar or something like that, and then it didn't end up working out. So there must have been a lot of things. Yeah, they shot like for months and had all the stuff, and then they condensed it into six, half-hour episodes. And so there must have been other things that they tried, didn't work out, and
Well,
what were those things?
didn't he spend like 9 months learning how to become a tightrope walker?
Yes,
I mean, how
yeah,
much
that's a
more
crazy episode.
the thousands of dollars and hours that you would spend doing like that's I mean, which is of course part of the joke, right? Like that
Yeah,
what if a guy the whole premise is what if a guy did this? What if a guy reacted like this in this situation?
uh-huh.
Like, yeah, that would be pretty weird, huh? Well, let's watch it.
Yeah, have you seen the Tightrope Walker episode? Because
I haven't. No, I just
it's the
reading
premise
about it.
is that he's pretending to be someone else, tightrope walking, so this guy can impress a woman, basically. And so that he, teaching himself this ridiculous skill that's actually legitimately dangerous. And it's not, the idea is that so someone else will be confused and think he's being someone else. So it's like so many like weird layers removed from reality. Yeah, it's really something. Okay, we've gone on a while, and it was announced they're going to do a season two. Like, I don't, they must have ideas, but how are they going to escalate this into something new? Who knows? Do you have any 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 additional thoughts you want to add before we wrap up?
I don't think so. Except that um I'm not sure that where I get there's sort of a meme on Twitter that like he has very powerful sex appeal. I don't really
Yes,
get
you're not
that.
feeling that.
I mean, I find him a blank. Like I guess he's cute, kinda, but where are people seeing sexuality in there? I don't know. That's the kind of his character has no sexuality.
Right.
Like
Yeah, that's
he has a creepy lack of sexuality, like a child, right? Like the way, like if a child were a man. It's funny that people are either locating something there that I'm not privy to, or they're like grafting it on to him. Good for them though, because like I'm all about having a crush on an unexpected source by them.
yeah. I
I just
mean,
don't see it in
it is
this.
interesting. The like only real press he did for this, as far as I know, was this New York Magazine cover story, which he's posed shirtless on the cover of New York Magazine. It's like, Nathan exposed or
A
something.
great picture.
So there does seem to be an organized attempt to turn him into some sort of figure like this. I mean, as a late 30s Jewish man with graying hair, I was like, glad that my my type was being identified as sexy online. But yeah, I don't. He's such an off-putting
Oh no, this is
guy.
not a that type isn't sexy because that is my type. I just don't see it in him. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I saw people saying like him dandling an infant or something was making people feel like, oh, like I want him to bear my children, sort of thing. But it's undercut so many times, and then what he actually ends up doing to the children, I don't know if there's that many people who watched all six episodes and were still like, Nathan Fielder, I want to have your babies. That would be an odd position.
I just become too practical um for that one.
Yeah.
Whereas I believe like Mark Ruffalo, for example, would be a wonderful father to my children. You know?
Yeah. It's but it is, I mean, maybe some part of it is like, I don't know, like sort of the mastermind or the puppet master sort of thing. I mean, another cinematic precursor to this is Truman Show in a way. And then, he is both like he is Truman participating, but also he's the Ed Harris character, the godlike character. And there's a couple different times where, yeah, I mean, God is God is referenced in the show, but there's other times there's a moment where Angela is praying, and you see what she's saying. She's whispering it to herself, but you see what she's saying in the subtitles, and it's something like dear God, please like use Nathan to enact your will. He thinks he knows what, like he thinks he's doing this, but I know that you're doing it. And that's that is an interesting thing to think about,
Mhm.
considering your one's religious beliefs and like who has the power in this situation. And if there's a guy on the show, it's Nathan Fielder. And then I mean, we
Well,
didn't
and
even
then
get.
that's nicely bookended by the last scene that Angela has where they're talking at the park and she's talking about how you have to forgive yourself. She'll forgive him because Jesus said you have to forgive forgive someone 7 times 70 times.
Yeah.
And that you also have to forgive yourself. And he's looking at her like, what the hell are you talking about?
Right.
Because he doesn't have this sense of like cosmic forgiveness. He has guilt and a sense of responsibility for everything. And she's saying what is actually the correct thing, which is you have to forgive yourself and you have to forgive other people easily because if you don't, life is going to be very difficult for you. Um, and so she's right about that. I don't think that she has that charitable of a perspective on everything else, because of her narrowness and her stridency. But she
Mhm.
was right in that scene about forgiveness, and I like how they gave her that as the end thing. It was a kind way to end things with her, and she's telling Nathan something that he needs to hear, and of course he's like, "I what?"
Yeah.
What are you
And
talking about?
one possible interpretation of that is like Jewish versus Christian, senses of
That's the stereotype,
responsibility
right?
and forgiveness, and sort of an Old Testament versus New
Or of
Testament thing.
guilt and not. I mean, that's the stereotype, right? Is that Judaism is associated with guilt or something, or
Right.
like Catholicism, which is yeah. Whereas evangelical Christianity is more like you don't have to feel bad, you just have to keep renewing your faith with Jesus Christ. And then actually, I've spent some time in evangelical church. That stereotype is true. Um, all you have to do is just turn around and be perfect again for a few hours, and then you just repent and then do it all over again. You're great. Like,
Mhm.
that's true. That's actually what they tell you.
That's interesting. She also has a line that actually I noted down where she says to him, "Not everything's make believe. Some things are real." And the thing she's talking about is um, Satan controlling Google or Google being satanic.
Mhm.
And it's yeah. There's so many things in here. I think people are still going to be watching this a decade from now and be like, "What the hell? How did
You
like?"
sound like you need to write your senior thesis on this show.
I'm sure there will be,
It's tragic that you're not being given the opportunity.
television studies like dissertations written on. You could probably just do one for each episode. Like there's it's a deep text. Okay, maybe we should wrap it up there. Okay, so you are on Twitter. If you want to, do you want to share your Twitter handle so people can find your thoughts and your
Yeah,
occasional piece of writing?
it's just my name, Joanna Mang, JoAnnamang.
And I am also on Twitter, ARYHW. You're a great follow on Twitter. I recommend people follow you in general. And people can, rate and review this episode and tell your friends and stuff like that. So thank you, Joanna, for coming back on. And you said once and future guest. And so I'd love to
Yeah,
have you on again sometime soon. And thanks
talking
to
about TV. That's what I like to do.
and thanks to all the listeners out there. And we'll see you again next time.